Good evening, everybody. I'm Eric Joseph from RTS Scotland, and a very warm welcome this evening to this event. This is brought to you by RTS Scotland in collaboration with Holdan. Tonight is all about streaming technologies. But rather than have me wax lyrical about this particular topic, I'm going to pass you on to someone who knows a thing or two about this. What he doesn't know isn't worth knowing. So from Holden, we have the Senior Product Specialist, Kriss Hampton-Joyce. Over to you, Kriss.
What an introduction. Wow, how do I follow that? Okay, let me just share my screen and then we can get started. Okay. So, as Eric's already mentioned, I am Kriss Hampton-Joyce. I'm a Senior Product Specialist at Holdan. Holdan are a cine and broadcast distributor predominantly, but we also distribute into the photography market, live AV, corporate, house of worship, kind of really everything to do with production, to be honest. This session is really, as Eric has already mentioned, is about live streaming. It's two things, really. It's an intro to live streaming technologies and applications. If you are a complete novice at live streaming, this might give you this should hopefully give you an idea as to what is sort of possible and how you would go about it. But two, it's really kind of an update, really, as to what's been going on for the past 2 years. Due to the pandemic, obviously workflows have had to change. We're required to have less people on set in the studio, but of course everyone still needs to be involved. So how can you use live streaming technologies to do that? And hopefully in this session, the idea is that you guys can at least have a foundation of understanding as what's needed to actually pull these technologies together and make a solution work for you. Now, we're not going to get too heavy in the technical side of things, just because, we do only have a limited amount of time, so we can only go too much into it. But we will dip into a little bit of what you need to know, as opposed to absolutely everything else that we could explain in this session. But the idea is that we're going to run for about 45 minutes. There will be a first half of going through some slides and a lot of the fundamental details, but then we'll get to some use cases and then actually some live demonstration of how these things work. So do bear with me. It won't be death by PowerPoint. I do promise you that. If you do have any questions, obviously the whole point of doing this thing live is that, you've got a Q&A function. So please do use it. If there's any question that pops into your mind, do pop it in. If you want to ask a question offline, then at the bottom of these slides on the screen is my work email address. Please feel free to drop me an email. That is absolutely fine. To do with anything around live streaming, what we're going to cover today, obviously any products that we do at Holdan, or anything about life, that's completely fine. If you want to do that, by all means. I might not reply, but if it's streaming related, I definitely will. Okay, so let's get into it. Streaming isn't just about going live on a platform anymore. Of course, that is a big part of live streaming. If you want to stream out to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, absolutely. Live streaming was kind of built for that. But, given the past 2 years, obviously this has been going on longer, but with the pandemic over the past 2 years, it's massively sped up the process of the cine and broadcast industry adopting live streaming technologies. It's also about bringing in remote presenters into a production or viewing a shot as it's happening on set, live, remotely from anywhere in the world. Same as the above, but in the post-production process. If you've got a director that's on the other side of the world, they need to be involved in the post-production process and see everything that's happening and have a means of communicating with the people in that post-edit suite. Then we can do that using live streaming technologies. And it's not just because of COVID anymore. Obviously, at the moment, yes, a lot of these technologies are being used because of COVID. It's about people moving less around and getting less people in buildings and rooms, but also from a carbon green outlook. If you don't have to travel and you can do the work that you need to do at the same level as if you were there in person, then why travel? So it's kind of multi-pronged. We've also got the ability of linking multiple studios together. Potentially, we could have one studio see the other studio, that could be other side of the world's cameras, and control them. We can run productions remotely through the cloud. So we could have, I'm sat here in the Peak District, I could control a video switcher that's based in London and fully run my production here from my home office. And route video signals to any smart device on a network within a building. These are just a few examples of how we can use these streaming technologies that I'm going to talk about in this session. Of course, there's lots more, and maybe you have some ideas as to how you might use it. But the whole idea of this session is really, I'm going to talk about some of the tech, show you some of the products, and show you actually how you would use them. And then obviously what we'll go through will fit into some of these use cases. So let's start from, really back to basics here. I don't know the experience level of streaming for you guys, so we'll just quickly skirt over this bit. But streaming in its most basic form, it's encoding, it's transmission, it's decoding, right? And when we're talking about encoding or decoding, they kind of fit into just two categories. We either have software-based or hardware-based. Now, software-based is, as the name suggests, it's software-based encoding or decoding. It's relying on software to package up that audio and video and then send it off to wherever it needs to go, to the other side of the world, to the next room, whatever. So it's completely reliant on the host computer or machine that software is installed on to do it. Now, the positives of software encoding is that it's incredibly affordable. If you look at the likes of OBS software, which is free, which is really popular. Heck, even if you go onto Facebook on your web browser now, on your computer, if you hit go live and it brings up your webcam, that's software-based encoding. Your machine is packaging up your webcam feed and sending it over to Facebook servers. You don't see that because it's happening in the background, but that's how accessible software encoding can be. On the flip side, you do have, really powerful software encoders, the likes of Wirecast, vMix, even New Blue software, which add way more capabilities. It's not just about software encoding. It's about, they add switching capabilities, the ability to play in videos, graphics, run actual production. So software-based encoding is actually really flexible because once we're in that software domain, it's very easy to do lots of other stuff, providing that you've got the grunt in your host machine. And that's really the big drawback, is that software-based encoding is completely dependent on your host machine. If the machine isn't up to the task, then you are going to get slower encoding, which results to higher latency. And we'll talk about latency as we go on. If you don't know what latency is, if we've got a device, we've got a signal going into it, it's the time it takes from that signal going in to that signal going out. Obviously, when we're doing live streaming, there are certain applications where we want to have super low latency. If I'm talking to you from the other side of the world, I want to have relatively low latency so we can have a normal conversation. If that latency is 30 seconds, we're going to be talking over each other and not knowing when the other person has finished speaking. So that's just one thing to be aware of. Now, hardware-based encoding, which is really what we're going to focus on mainly in this session, is, as the name suggests, it's hardware. You're actually using a physical purpose-built device that's sole purpose is to encode and decode audio and video. The positives of that, why you'd want to get a hardware-based encoder over a software-based, is that it's going to be reliable and it's going to be durable. That thing has just the one job and it will do it. So you can leave it on all day, all night. It shouldn't trip over. And when we're talking about cinema, broadcast, live AV, that reliability is something that you really need. So that's really what we're going to focus on in this session. And of course, if they are custom built to do that one job, you get faster encoding, typically lower latency. Now, the main drawback, just to be fair to software-based encoding, is the cost. You're actually buying a physical item that you can tangibly hold. And also in comparison to the likes of vMix or Wirecast, you don't get as many functions because it just has that one job. It encodes or decodes video. That's it. There's no switching, etc. And just to note, you do get standalone hardware encoders, decoders, which we'll go through, such as this one. But you do also get hardware-based encoders built into cameras. This PTZ camera just next to me here, you can just see in the corner of the frame of my video. That's a Bird Dog PTZ camera that has a live streaming encoder built straight into it. So they're not just standalone devices, they're often incorporated into other bits of kit. But the key thing that I want you to take away from this is, one, obviously to be aware of software-based and hardware-based encoding. But it's not just that, it's the thing that you need to know is what are the codecs and the streaming protocols that my software-based or my hardware-based encoder supports, because that's really the crucial bit. So we'll go into that and we'll cover, these are the streaming protocols that I want to cover. Obviously, there are a lot of streaming protocols out there. These, at the moment, for me, are the ones I'm talking about the most with customers, with broadcasters and live AV. The first one is really just there from a legacy point of view, RTMP, real-time messaging protocol. It is one of the oldest streaming protocols out there that's actually still used. RTMP is what 99% of live platforms will ask for in terms of receiving audio and video. So if you wanted to go live on YouTube, Twitter, Vimeo, any of those platforms, they're going to ask to receive audio and video using RTMP. So pretty much any live streaming encoder that you buy will, you can put a good bet on that it will support RTMP. That's sort of the base standard. Now, when we talk about streaming protocols, we don't want to get confused with codecs. They're two separate things. RTMP is, you imagine it to be the carrier that carries our data over the web to wherever it needs to go. Obviously, it needs to have something in it. Now, RTMP uses H.264 codec for audio and video compression. H.264 is, it's getting on a little bit now. It's heavily compressed video, but it's not that efficient. So you look at the typical bit rate needed to stream at 4K 25 frames a second. You need 32 megabits per second upload speed continuous to do that. So it's quite a lot of data for going live out there, especially if you're working in higher resolutions, more than 1080p anyway. But the biggest drawback for RTMP, other than it's only H.264, is the latency. We talked about latency before. Typical latency of an RTMP stream. So if I have an encoder here, say this one in my hand, streaming RTMP to like YouTube, the time it takes for my video to get to YouTube and be displayed could be from 3 to 30 seconds, if not more. I've had it 45 seconds, a minute. So it's only really suitable for end of the chain. That's the last place that signal is going, and you don't need any sort of interaction coming back or anything like that. It's just going live to a platform. So that's one to know, because if you're going to go and do live streaming, then to a live platform, it's going to be using RTMP. But the more interesting stuff is SRT and NDI. So that's where we're going to focus more on in this session, if I'm honest. So SRT, if you don't know what that is, it's a streaming protocol that's designed to send high quality video over the internet securely with low latency and jitter. Now, the cool thing about SRT is that it is codec agnostic. So it doesn't really matter what it's shifting along to the other side of the world, or again, down the road. You can put any video codec in there realistically, but predominantly it's H.264 or H.265, which is also called HEVC. Now, H.265 is sort of the rebirth of H.264 in the new age to cope with higher resolutions and frame rates. The reason it was made was literally just to offer more efficient encoding, decoding. If you look at the typical bit rate for 4K 25 on this slide, if you're doing it in H.264, it's 32 megabits per second. You do it in H.265 for the same perceivable quality, so you won't perceive any noticeable difference. You can get away with around about half the bit rate, so 15 megabits per second. So it makes it much more manageable when we're sending the likes of 4K 25 HDR content across the web. We can do so much. It's much easier to manage. But a big selling point is that it is very low latency. We can send a video feed from my office here in the Peak District to Singapore, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to be able to do that with less than a second of latency, which is pretty incredible considering, that signal is hopping around multiple data centers or whatnot around the world. So SRT, it's very current, very exciting. NDI, on the other hand, again, very new, very current. This was originally developed to send high quality video, visually lossless video, but on a local network. So not going out to the internet, although there are ways of doing that. We can talk about that. But the idea really behind NDI was, when it was conceived, was to essentially replace SDI or HDMI cabling in a studio. NDI actually uses its own codec called NDI, which is a 10-bit 42 all intra variable bitrate codec. So absolutely broadcast quality if you want. Yes, you can see the typical bitrate for 4K 25, 200 megabits per second. Loads of data to work with there, which is typically why we don't send NDI over the web, but we can do. But it's mainly used for local networks. So think of it to be used in a studio, in a building, sending video and audio around that building. And the latency is incredibly low, a few frames. So if we look at this NDI camera just next to me on my video feed, if you can see me, which I think you can, this BirdDog PTZ camera supports full NDI, has an SDI output and NDI output. The NDI output compared to the SDI output is only 1 frame of delay. So really minuscule delay there, considering we're using video over IP here. We're not using SDI, we're using video over IP, and we get lots of benefits of doing that, because when you think of SDI, you connect an SDI cable, output of the camera, input to a monitor, input to a vision mixer. Information only goes the one way, and if you want to change that, you have to physically go and add another cable to go the other way or connect it to something else. When we're in the realms of video over IP, everything is just going into a central network switch. So as long as everything is connected to that, everything is interconnected, and we can send data on the one cable bidirectional. So we'll talk more about that shortly, but that's really what I wanted to touch upon. The ones that we're going to be focusing on is SRT and NDI. Now, you may have heard about NDI HX, which has a lot of the benefits of NDI. However, it uses H.264 compression. So it's the same sort of bit rates required for what you would use with RTMP, for example. And it does have increased latency. So NDI HX is, it's fine if you don't need all that data and you're not too bothered about the latency, but just be aware that NDI and NDI HX are not the same thing. Sometimes we refer to NDI as full NDI, just to make it clear which one we're talking about. We're just talking about NDI in this one. Okay, so I promise we won't do everything on these slides. We will get to looking at some products physically and having a bit of a demo. But here's some examples of some encoders, decoders. I've picked a couple of different brands here just to show you the flavor of options that are out there. Now the Epiphan range, if you're not familiar with Epiphan, they create these products called Pearls, and they're essentially all-in-one media processing units. They can live stream, they can record. Typically, on a few of the models, you can live switch, so it acts as a multicam switcher. Lots of other stuff, but the Pearl Nano, which is their latest one, can stream in RTMP as well as SRT. But what's really interesting is that with a future firmware update, this will also support 4K HEVC coding. Encoding or decoding. And the big positive with this unit is that it's actually not that much money in comparison to the rest of the competition out there. So that's really one to watch. Epiphan are really big in the corporate and higher education sector. I think with the Pearl Nano, this may be the start of them bridging over into live AV broadcast. So one to watch, and I'll show you a little bit about that as we go on. But next is Teradek. Now Teradek, I've are really popular in the cine broadcast industry. That's kind of their main clientele. They have a range called Cube, which is this one that I've got in my hand now, which hopefully you guys can all see. These are really built for the rigors of production. They're very hardy units. They can be mounted on cameras, powered by V-LOT batteries. They can be rack mounted. They have HDMI and SDI inputs. They are very, very rugged. Now, they're slightly different when compared to like the Pearl Nanos, is this fact that you either buy an encoder or a decoder. They don't do both. There are options where you can just get them and they'll just do H.264, and there are options where you can get H.264 and HEVC. And they stream using RTMP, SRT. Some of the models can do NDI HX, but we're focusing on NDI, just remember that. So these are the cubes. They are limited to 1080, so full HD. They do models called, a model called the Prism that supports 4K. So you can do 10-bit 4K HDR streaming with that. And then finally, we've got Bird Dog just on the far right. Bird Dog are a big player in the NDI space. They're not actually that old of a company. I think they've been going for, taking a bit of a guess here, I think 6-7 years. But the nice thing about their products is that all Bird Dog products use full NDI. Full NDI, as I mentioned before, is 10-bit 42 all intra, even includes alpha channel, and their encoder decoder cards can support to 4K 60. They can do both encode and decode, and they also have cameras, PTZ cameras as well. Now, all these units here are really just, apart from the Bird Dog one, are just there to encode or decode the one stream. If you were thinking about this from a studio point of view, where you might have lots of streams coming in and out, and then you would want to look at the sort of beefier versions of these units. So the Teradek Prism that I mentioned before is a rack mount version, has slots for either 3 or 9 encoder decoder cards. I've got something similar behind me, I'll show you in a second. And obviously then you've got up to 9 encoders or decoders running in one studio, and they can convert to SDI, HDMI, whatever you want. That Bird Dog encoder that's on the slide there has 4 SDIs that you can see. That's because that unit actually, it's called the Bird Dog Quad. It has 4 encoders or decoders built into that one unit. So you can encode or decode simultaneously to 4 different 4K 60 video streams to 12G SDI, which is pretty incredible considering the size of it. I've got one on my table, so you'll be able to see that in a second. So let's actually move on to some use cases. That's the bulk of the dry stuff. So a basic live streaming case for NDI, right? So we have an NDI camera on the left there, which is actually the same camera I've got here next to me, which outputs NDI. That camera could be a cine style camera, it could be an ENG camera, a studio camera on a ped. We just had to put an NDI encoder there to get it onto that local network. And as you can see, all of these devices are just feeding into this network switch. And we've got a vision mixer. It's a TriCaster there, which takes NDI natively. There are other switches that take NDI natively, but if you are using a traditional switcher, then we just decode it using an NDI decoder, such as what we have in the top right of the screen. So we've got the vision mixer, who's obviously doing the show. We've got a post-production room somewhere else in the building where they've got a nice monitor and they're wanting to see the output of the show or that camera. Then we've got an NDI decoder HDMI unit, which is one from Bird Dog, which I think is like £100. It's crazy cheap. Just driving a generic flat screen display that could be outside the studio to show passers-by what's happening on the inside. And then we also have someone viewing the stream on a laptop who's just on the network. Maybe they just want to see, see the shots, what's going on. They might be elsewhere in the building. Maybe they're a producer. They don't want to be in the same room as the vision mixer because of COVID, for example. So let's have a look at NDI in particular. We'll try and replicate the small sections of this setup just so you can get an idea as to how it works. So I'm just going to go out this slide so you guys can see my desktop. So first things first, whenever we're adding an encoder or a decoder to a network, the way that we control them is usually by a web browser from laptop or a computer that's on that same network. And it's just a case of typing in the IP address. And if you don't know the IP address, you can either look at the manual for the product that you're using out of the box, or you can use a LAN scanner. It'll show you the IP addresses. There's multiple ways about going about this. So I have already got mine bookmarked. This is the BirdDog P4K camera's settings page. I'm not going to talk about the camera controls. I'm just talking about the encoding. So NDI encode. You can see here that I've got my variable bitrate, which I can set. It's just a slider. We're at 130 megabits per second. I can set my resolution. I'm just going to do 1080 because it's just for this live stream. Don't need to do 4K. Got all these controls: 420, 422, NDI audio. What do we want? Onboard tally. One of the big selling points of NDI, I've already touched upon it before, about when you're comparing it to SDI, is that it's not just one way that traffic is flowing. We can send stuff back to the camera over the network. That could be a tally, for example. That could be comms. So if someone was actually physically stood next to this camera, or they're using a decoder on a ENG style camera, they can plug some headphones into that. We can talk to them through the network, but also control as well. And I'll show you that. So this is all set up and working fine. This camera is, it's on the network. I can get to its control page. So if I just minimize this, I'm just going to launch a little bit of software called NewTek NDI video monitor. I think it's called Studio Monitor on Windows. It's free. It's from the creators of NDI, which is NewTek. This basically just allows me to see what NDI sources we've got on the network, and I can just see we've got one. Click on it. There we go. This is the live feed coming out of my camera here on the desk. And just to prove the point before, when I said, NDI, we can send stuff back to the camera, even from this free bit of software, I can control my PTZ camera. We can fire off presets. There was a part of me there hoping that this was the right preset. It wasn't going to go to a very untidy section of the room. See, so we can control this remotely. So I could be, in the post-production room. I could be in a separate room to the gallery. It doesn't matter. We can obviously restrict these controls if we want to, if we don't want to give people that control. But by default, you do have that flexibility. You can sort of see the power of this sort of setup now. So just looking back at the use case, that's us going to the laptop viewer that we said. That's fine. How do we send it to a physical? And to be fair, that'll be the same process for an NDI vision mixer. How do we send it to a decoder then? How does that actually work in reality? So I'll leave this up. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use this decoder here. So this is BirdDog decoder. Has a HDMI output on this one. You can get SDI versions, or the one I showed you before that has 4 SDIs. Neat thing about this, it has a little screen that tells you the IP address as soon as it goes on the network. I know that you can't see that on this stream because it's very small, but trust me, it does say that. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to log into the web interface, which I've already bookmarked. And I've got a little monitor here as well. It's just taking the HDMI out of the decoder, just so you can see what's happening. Obviously, at the moment, absolutely nothing. If we go to AV, decode settings, there we go. Available NDI sources. So this unit, much like how my laptop did, it will literally just scan the network, tell me all the available NDI sources, which is the real benefit of NDI. It's self-discoverable. I click on this drop down, I've got my camera, I hit apply, make sure we're outputting via HDMI. There we go. Obviously, this could be going into a traditional vision mixer, could be going into a flat screen TV. This camera is not connected in any way to my setup other than the Ethernet port on the back. So it's just going into my network switch, decoders going to the network switch, and then we're decoding that here. And, like I said, we can do that in glorious 10-bit 422 if we want to. So absolutely, we can bring that into a live production and mix that in with our other sources. So you can see how powerful NDI really is. I mean, there are software solutions, even from BirdDog actually, where it will list all of the NDI sources that it detects on the network and all of the NDI decoders that we have on the network. So from the one screen, you can be like, okay, camera A, I want you to go to decoder 1, 2, 3, and 4. You know, and you're at that point, you're really using NDI like a traditional SDI or video matrix, but you've got so much more flexibility operating it, because, you know, all of a sudden, a smartphone can be an NDI source, a laptop can be an NDI destination. We can push anything to anywhere as long as it's a smart device or an NDI capable encoder decoder. It's primarily used just for local networks. I've already covered that. However, you can make a network seem like a local network that is actually spread across different areas using a VPN, a virtual private network. Now, we're actually testing with a current broadcaster at the moment, having a couple of their post-production suites have these NDI encoders and decoders, so that they can literally transmit from one site to another over the web, but through their private VPN. As long as that VPN has the bandwidth, you know, as long as you're paying enough money to, you know, have that consistency of stream, absolutely it works the same as it's on a local network. So technically, yes, you can go over the web. There is another way of doing it, which we'll move on to, but they're predominantly used for local networks. So that is NDI. Let's look at SRT. SRT, remember, just a little bit of a refresher, SRT is low latency transmission across the web. It's designed for across the web. Here's a typical use case. We've got a local edit suite outputting into a streaming encoder. The director, producer, whoever is at home with their lovely monitor, and they need to be part of the process. It could even be another studio on the other side of the world just to save on the travel, okay? Really, this is what we call a point-to-point stream. Although we're going for the internet, we're not going anywhere else. We're literally just going from one encoder to another. To do that with SRT, maybe I can show you very quickly. This bit's unrehearsed. Let's see how this goes. So I'm just logging into this Pearl Nano, which isn't doing anything. There's no signal coming into it. And I'm going to then log into Happy Fan. Another bigger unit of this that is based in Bracknell, so about 200 miles away from me. And I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit here because I'm going to talk about the ability of doing this as we go on, well, in a minute. So what I've essentially done is I've logged in locally on this, and I've logged in over the internet to the one in Bracknell, which is a much bigger unit. All I'm going to do is try and initiate an SRT stream. Now, to initiate an SRT stream, it's slightly different to RTMP, where it's just sort of you just type in the URL and your stream key, and it goes to YouTube or wherever. I'll show you that if you're not familiar with it. But to do SRT, here we go. You need to know at least one piece of information. You need to know the public IP address of at least one of the units, either an encoder or decoder. If you know the public IP address, then we can basically call one of those units. If you know them both, then you can use a mode called Rendezvous, where both of these units will reach out to each other over the web, and they will try and negotiate the best way of getting this stream going, basically. So I'm just starting the call from the remote one. Oh, there we go. It's already connected. And if you look at this unit here, sorry, I know this screen share isn't ideal. You can see we're actually getting a live feed coming in. This is a perfect example of, well, the use case that we just discussed. Or if you wanted to bring in a remote presenter into a production. If I was running a production of this unit, that in Bracknell, my remote presenter's there, stood in front of that unit, I've now got them here in my home studio, and I can do whatever I want with their feed. You know, I can actually see the live feed in my encoder. Obviously the office is, it's, you know, it's 7:30 and the office is turned off, so it's not the most exciting, but that's an SRT connection. And we do get some information with the Pearl as to how that stream is performing. Here it is. Here's our statistics. Getting a little bit of packet loss, so we would increase the buffer. But in a nutshell, the round trip time from here to there, you know, 11 milliseconds latency. We've got 80 milliseconds latency here, 200 miles away, bringing in this remote center. You can see just how powerful that is. We would increase that latency a little bit just because we're getting a little bit of packet loss. But that's the nice thing with SRT, is that you can sort of balance it and adjust it as you need to. We have a better example of SRT. So I didn't want to spend too much of that, but I just wanted to show you what the Pearl page looks like. So back to this slide. This use case. Okay, and this one's been a really common one for productions in COVID. Having as little people on set as possible, whilst everyone who still needs to know what's going on can be involved. So, you know, we have it could be a single cinema camera, it could be multiple. They would have these streaming encoders, a cube, for example, physically attached to the cameras. These have they have wireless capability or a fixed Ethernet if you've got that, but mostly if you're on set, it's going to be using the wireless. And then it's going up to the internet, and then somehow on the internet it's being replicated to all these destinations. The way that we go about doing that is that we need to have something at the internet level that's receiving this stream and then serving it to everyone else. It's not like NDI where we're local. Obviously, once we're going out to the wider web, something needs to be managing that. And that's really where we get onto cloud management, cloud platforms. Cloud platforms are essentially, if we look at Epiphan, we look at BirdDog, we look at Teradek, they all have their own cloud platforms. Essentially, it just allows you to monitor all of your encoders and decoders from the one place through a web browser from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be near your kit. You can adjust the settings of all those connected devices as if you were there locally. We can route encoders to decoders, much like a traditional video matrix, as I mentioned before, similar to what we can do with NDI, but this time on the internet. We can share streams with users by giving them a web link, and they can watch securely. We can transcode, we can forward on to platforms like Facebook and YouTube. When I say transcode, by the way, a lot of the benefits that we've talked about with the higher end encoders is that we can stream in H.265. If you're going to the likes of YouTube and Facebook, they only accept H.264 RTMP, remember. So if we want to use H.265, because it's less data to send up, we can send that up to this cloud platform. They'll transcode it into H.264 RTMP, and then it can go to YouTube. Yeah. We can record content on there. We can do network bonding. I'll try and cover them all, but I'm very aware of time. So if I don't, obviously do ask any questions. And if you want to see something in more depth after this, then you can just ping me an email. So let's have a look at a core platform and a cloud platform and what it allows us to do, because that's where the really neat stuff happens. So I'm going to sign into Core Cloud, which is Teradek's cloud offering. I'm going to go to sources. So I'm just going to get my camera up because I want you to see something in a second. I'm sorry, just bear with me. So premature. So here we go. There we go. Now within this in Core Cloud, I'm on this sources tab, and here we can see all of the encoders that I have tied to my cloud account. Now when I say tied, what I mean is, if I have this unit, I send this out with my production crew, I've configured this So as soon as it gets internet connectivity, it's automatically going to go to Core Cloud. Users on the ground don't need to do anything other than make sure you're feeding internet to them. And you can have a whole fleet of these. So as a technical point of view, it's very easy to manage because you just send them out, tell them to give it internet. You can take over because it comes in Core. So we can see we've just got the one active at the moment, which is named SebCube655. Seb is one of my colleagues. He's based in London, so we're about 200 miles away. We're looking at this. We can click into it. We can see a live stream of it here in this view. It's just BBC News playing into his encoder. We can see how it's connected. It is wired and we've got a fairly stable connection. No concerns there. That's great. We can see how it's performed over time. A couple of drop frames here and there. So maybe his internet connection isn't too great, but it's fine for the time being. We can see that it's taken HDMI import, it's 1080p, 60 frames a second. We could even upgrade the firmware remotely from here. Look at the history log when it was turned on and used. We can actually control it, like I said before, completely from here remotely. So if I want to change the resolution that it's encoding, I want to force it to be 720, I want to change the frame rate, I want to change the encoding bit rate, because I've seen he's had drop frames. Maybe let's go for a lower bandwidth just to make sure it copes. We can do. So you can do a lot of firefighting before it's actually going to happen with something like this. So what else can we actually do? So I'm going to do a little test here. Under destinations, much like sources, we have decoders listed. Now, he says, let's see. Well, I was meant to have a decoder listed. Is that still plugged in? Seems to have gone offline. Okay, we'll come back to that if it comes back online. But what I wanted to show you was under here, we've got decoders. We can link to any decoder that is linked to our account. So again, very much like a video matrix, we can just select as many decoders we want. These could be anywhere from around the world, and it will just push this stream to those physical decoders. These are all Teradek decoders. That's how they're linked into this account. But if you don't have Teradek decoders, if I scroll down, what Core is doing is it's giving me an MPEG TS, an SRT, RTSP, HLS version of this stream, so I can give it to anyone who's got a third-party decoder. And just to show that working, I'll just use VLC. And we'll do an SRT connection, copy that, file, open network. So I'm using a software decoder here. Obviously, you can use a physical decoder. There we go. This is the live stream. So you could do that for multiple third-party decoders for whatever flavor your decoder supports. So we can go to our decoder here, which is a Teradek one. We can go to a third-party one. Just going back to that use case before, there's the decoder sorted. What about the remote viewers on laptops and smartphones? Sorry, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to cover this. I'm determined. So we've got this dashboard where it says Holdan Live, and you can see that I've got this cube encoder here. Now, what I can do is I can have as many encoders I want to in this workspace. Holdan Live could be new James Bond film, shoot day one, and I've got 4 cameras on set. They're all feeding into this and they would appear here. What I can do is, we stick with that idea, is I can share that. Now I can share it via email, SMS, or for the sake of this demonstration, I can just literally get a link, copy that, and I would send it to producers, directors, whoever needs to be able to see this stream. They paste it into their browser. This is what they see. They don't see all of the other settings or anything. They can't break anything. they would just see the feeds that we've shared on our workspace. Obviously, we've just got the one, but like I said before, if we had the 4 cameras on set, 1, 2, 3, 4, they'd all appear here. They can view these streams. This is playing smoothly. I don't know how it's coming across on the screen share. They can also see who else in their crew is watching this on this. They can even chat with them. Hello, everyone. You know, and discuss how great or terrible this current shot is. And you know, they can download an app on iOS or an Android and view it from a mobile device as well. So it's a really neat feature for being able to share your streams if you don't have decoders everywhere. It's incredibly popular. Can also enable voice chat, but that is a premium feature. Really skirting along now, just because I want to show you just 2 more things. What you can do here is we can record. So I can record on the cloud should I want to have a backup, or if I want to, you know, if this was a shot coming out of a live show, I am just going to do a quick recording. And then someone said something, you know, amazingly hilarious, or that bit was really interesting. I want to post that on social ASAP. I can stop recording, go to my recordings folder. We can see that one that I've just done is there. It's just tying it up. It normally only takes a few seconds, but here you can see all of our previous recordings, and we can download them, we can play them, preview them in the platform. So it's just a really quick way of being able to grab snippets of video, and the snippet that you'll grab, it will be at the same bit rate that you've been encoding at. So, you know, if you're doing H.265, you know, you could, in theory, do 4K HDR here. Absolutely. And finally, just going back to what we started on with RTMP, if you really wanted to, you can still go live on the likes of YouTube or any of these sites, or any site that takes RTMP ultimately. Let's just very quickly show you that. For those of you who've never gone live on YouTube or Facebook, we'll round off the session with something relatively basic in comparison to what we've just covered. So consider this a wind down. If I go live on any live platform, if you wanted to use a third-party streaming encoder, any of these hardware encoders, even the likes of OBS, I've got to verify that it's me. Bear with me 2 seconds, and we will get through this. YouTube is getting very paranoid recently, making you confirm that it's you all the time. I suppose it's a good thing, really. Okay, so as this is loading, what I'm looking for are two key pieces of information. The stream URL, copy that, RTMP address, I'll paste it in there. Stream key, which tells YouTube this is for my channel and it's for this live. Save. Oh, let's put test. There it is. So what I've done now, I've just linked this YouTube live here. Now I could also do a one for Vimeo, one for Twitch, as many platforms as I want, on top of all the decoders, whether it's Teradek or third party. If I hit go live here now, what should happen, big moment of truth, is Core is now relaying that stream on to the likes of YouTube. We're seeing a black screen at the moment. Remember, RTMP, latency. We just got to wait, and eventually we should see the news. Hey presto, there we go. And we're pulling it through. It doesn't seem that my Teradek decoder has come online, but just so you have an idea, because I have mentioned it a couple of times, and then we'll finish this session off here, because hopefully that's given you a good flavor as to what's possible. I just want to whip this camera around, because here behind me is one of the more studio orientated decoders. This takes up to 8. This is a T-Rex. It's a little bit of an older model. It's been replaced with the Prism, but you get the idea. You've got slots where you can add in encoders or decoders on there. But yeah, I need to look into that. So I'm sorry that didn't work. But if you do want to see that working, then we can arrange that separately. So I think I'm going to hold it there, and then close these windows and hopefully hand over to Eric to see if we've got any questions.
Hello again. Kriss, thank you so much for such an informative workshop. We do have a couple of questions for you. We have Paul asking, does any software-only applications support SRT?
Does any software-only application support SRT? Yeah, absolutely. You can look at the likes of vMix, Wirecast. They would typically support SRT. You saw me decoding SRT using using VLC. Are you talking about encoding or decoding? Decoding is it's a lot easier, to be honest. So
I believe
here
it
I've
was
got.
decoding.
Oh, right. Yeah. Loads. I mean, you can even get SRT apps for iOS, Android. So if you want to just have your iPad decode an SRT stream, absolutely you can do. And then you can output that and go into a switcher or whatnot. That's often something I do just from a testing point of view, just to make sure that my encode at the other end is working fine. There you
Correct.
go. There's SRT decoding.
Thank you so much. And another question for you, Kriss. Can you mix and match these streaming technologies? By that, I mean, can you mix SRT with NVI in a live broadcast scenario?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Depending on what you're using for your vision mixer, whatever is pulling the whole show together, let's say it's just the standard SDI based vision mixer. SRT is just a means of getting the audio and video across the internet into that studio room. You can then decode it using a decoder into SDI. NDI, you can have an NDI camera like this one next to me. In the studio, we just have an NDI decoder that goes to SDI, and we go into the vision mixer. It's really not that far different from each other. I mean, you wouldn't want to mix between SRT and NDI in the same physical space because they both have different levels of latency, and with a multi-camera production, you would eventually notice that. But if you're bringing in remote presenters using SRT and then running your production in NDI or a mixture of NDI and standard SDI, absolutely, yes.
Perfect. One last question for you, Kriss. Any reason not to use VLC as your decoding application?
Comes back to what we started with, software versus hardware decoding. If you've got a really high spec machine that you trust, then yeah, use VLC. It will probably work fine. But you know, the nature of Windows updates, or you know, the things that go along with full-blown computers, Windows and Mac, there's a lot more risk involved, you know, system updates, etc. So that's why it's preferable to have a physical decoder, just because you're not going to have any of that, and it's, you know, it's going to be fine just to be left on all the time. But if you're happy with it, SRT, yeah, use it on a software-based encoder, fine.
Fantastic. Kriss, you have been absolutely wonderful, and your time is so appreciated by everyone, including us at RTS Scotland. Thank you so very, very much. It would be remiss of me not to mention the behind the scenes contribution from India Weir. So thank you, India, who kind of used her expertise to keep us all right. Also, Kriss, thank you again, and all our attendees. For anyone interested in learning more about the RTS, feel free to go to our URL, which is, I believe, rts.org.uk. So it leaves me to say thank you all and good night.